The scent of baked peaches still clung to my hands as I set the cobbler down on Darren's granite countertop. It was his birthday, 36 today, and I had convinced myself that this dinner might be a bridge, a small return to warmth. The house buzzed with low conversation and clinking cutlery. Bianca floated between the dining area and the kitchen, topping off wine glasses, her bracelets jingling like a metronome. I left the cobbler to cool and went to retrieve the small wrapped box I had placed near the sink. When I stepped back into the dining room, the scene froze me. Darren sat at the end of the table, pen in hand, his shoulders relaxed, smiling at something Bianca had said. Spread out before him was a sheath of documents, stamped, clipped, and far too official for a family meal. My eyes went straight to the last page, where my name, in my handwriting but not mine, curved across the signature line. Is that my signature? The words left me softer than I expected, but the room went still. Darren didn't even blink. It's just paperwork, he said, still smiling. You'd sign it anyway. Bianca looked at me with a carefully blank face, her fork poised above her plate, as though she'd rehearsed how to stay out of this. My gaze flicked back to the pen in his hand, the dark ink drying on the page. I tightened my grip on the gift box until the paper creased beneath my fingers. Years of training in boardrooms and audits held my expression steady, but inside something slid loose. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision he'd made long before I walked through his door. I stepped closer, setting the box gently beside his plate as though nothing had happened, and forced my voice into the same measured calm I used on nervous clients. "Happy birthday, Darren," I said. He looked up at me, still smiling, still sure of his control, and I knew the rest of the evening would not go the way he thought. When I arrived that evening, something had felt off, not wrong enough to turn around, but wrong enough that I noticed. Bianca greeted me at the door with a smile too wide, too quick, as if she'd practiced it. Darren appeared a beat later, arms open, voice just a little too bright. "Mom, you made it. Come in. Bianca put together a whole spread." Inside, the dining table was set like a magazine layout. Folded linen napkins, wine glasses at every place, a charcuterie board so large it needed its own side table. Brie, prosciutto, olives soaked in something citrusy. And Darren, he never cared for this kind of presentation. He leaned in and kissed my cheek like we were close, like I hadn't noticed his texts getting fewer, shorter. "I'll just set the cobbler in the kitchen," I said, holding the warm dish like a shield. Their laughter behind me didn't reach the kitchen. I needed a moment, a minute to breathe. But instead of returning to the table right away, I turned toward Darren's study, his old office tucked off the hallway. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the space was too clean. The desk cleared, computer off, a folder sitting perfectly square at the center, labeled in Darren's handwriting, "Contingency, Trust Transfer." My heart tapped once, then sped up. I opened it slowly. Inside, a notarized-looking document, my name typed across the top. And then there it was, my signature, crooked, clumsy, a bad imitation. On the upper right corner of the front page, a sticky note. "Move fast before she changes her mind." I closed the folder, slid it back into place, and stood very still. The carpet under my feet didn't feel like his carpet. The house didn't feel like his house. It felt like a stage, like I had just walked into the third act of a play where everyone else knew their lines. I walked back to the kitchen, slowly straightened my sleeves, and opened the fridge to slide the cobbler inside. There was a time I used to believe hard work earned loyalty. After Charles died suddenly in a car accident during a storm, I didn't fall apart. I didn't have time to. Darren was 11, still growing, still asking questions I didn't always have answers for. So I got to work. I taught business classes at the community college during the day, cleaned offices in the evenings, and transcribed court reports on the weekends. I learned how to sleep standing up, how to stretch a single roast chicken into 4 meals, how to patch Darren's uniforms when the knees gave out. When his prep school tuition spiked, I sold my engagement necklace, the one Charles gave me on a freezing December night with a quiet promise. I didn't tell Darren. I just smiled when he came home with another perfect score and told him how proud I was. When he got into college, I celebrated, and when he left a solid job to chase a startup idea with no investors, I dipped into my savings to help him. I told myself I was investing in his future, not just covering a risk. I canceled a surgery that year. Nothing critical, just something the doctor said could wait if I was careful. I was always careful. I never asked Darren to pay me back, never mentioned the skipped appointments, the missing necklace, or the hours I spent scanning receipts just to make rent work. All I ever asked for years was trust, that he'd carry himself with the same integrity I tried to live by, that he'd become the kind of man who understood what things cost, not in dollars, but in choices. And now here I was, standing in his kitchen beside a fridge hiding forged documents and secrets. I never gave him permission to write. I reached in and pulled the second folder out. The tab read, Final Stage, Durable Power of Attorney. A week before dinner, I woke to a message from my banking app. It wasn't loud, just a quiet ping in the early morning dark. Suspicious login attempt from unknown device. Blocked. I stared at the screen, heart slow but heavy. I knew that name. I recognized the location, my son's neighborhood. I didn't call him. I didn't ask questions. I opened my laptop, pulled up the trust account, and moved every cent to a secure holding structure I had arranged years ago, just in case. Something about motherhood teaches you to always have a back door. Then I called Mr. Harden. He was more than my estate attorney. He was the one who helped me after Charles passed, the one who stayed long after the paperwork was done. When he picked up, I didn't need to explain much. I need you to witness something, I said. He didn't ask for details, just cleared his calendar and said, Should I bring a bottle of wine or a clipboard? I laughed, a real laugh, both. I told Darren I'd invited an old bridge friend to stop by the house for dessert. He didn't care. He never asked which friend. The plan was simple. Let them feel safe. Let them think they'd won at the dinner table, while Darren made jokes over wine and passed plates like nothing was wrong. I kept my phone in my lap, screen dimmed. The cobbler was still cooling in the kitchen. Bianca poured me another glass. Then there it was, red alert, unauthorized access attempt detected, trust account. I didn't move, didn't speak. Just turned the screen a fraction and saw the flag light up across the display exactly as I'd programmed it. From across the table, Mr. Harden raised his glass toward me, ever the guest, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the one that said, It's time. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and smiled. Let him finish signing. Let him believe. Let him bury himself with his own pen. Darren folded his hands on the table like a man in control, like a man who had rehearsed his script. We were thinking, he began, glancing at Bianca for confirmation. $280,000 would wipe the slate clean, pay off the business line, the condo renovations, and we could even put your name on the deed. He smiled like he was offering me a gift. Symbolic, of course, Bianca added, dabbing her mouth with a cloth napkin. You wouldn't actually be responsible for anything, just included. I nodded, quiet, listening, letting them talk. They went on about rising interest rates and bad timing with the markets. Darren even mentioned how generous it would be for me to help now, since, as he put it, You're not getting any younger, Mom. That one almost made me laugh. He reached across the table, the pen still in hand. It's mostly done. Just needs a final signature. Yours, of course. I looked at the pen, then at him, then I picked up my phone. No words, just turned the screen toward him and held it there. Access denied, funds transferred, fraud alert active. His face didn't change at first, not fully, just the eyes tightening at the corners. Bianca leaned in. What is this? The account you tried to access, I said evenly. It no longer holds anything with your name on it, or mine. Darren's smile cracked. You moved the money? He said, his voice dropping. Why would you do that? I held his gaze. Because you already did. Silence settled over the table like dust. Then Darren pushed back his chair. So that's it? You're just going to let your family drown? I looked between the two of them, my son and the woman he'd chosen, and saw no shame, only disbelief that the game hadn't gone their way. Bianca's tone sharpened. Do you know what this means for us? I did, but I also knew what it meant for me. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked to the kitchen to retrieve my bag. When I returned, the temperature in the room had changed. Darren stood, arms crossed, jaw tight. So that's how it is, he said. You come into my house, set traps, bring your lawyer, and humiliate me in front of my wife. I didn't answer. I simply placed my bag on the chair and folded the napkin that had fallen to the floor. Bianca scoffed from across the table. This is exactly what I warned you about, Darren. She's paranoid, controlling. She's always trying to be the smartest person in the room. She didn't have to come tonight, Darren continued, his voice rising. But no, you had to make a show of it. Of me. Still, I said nothing. He slammed his palm down on the table. You always loved control more than family. That made me look up. My voice was quiet, steady. No, Darren, I loved you enough to trust you. That was my mistake. He blinked just once, like he hadn't expected it to hurt. Bianca rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're acting like he betrayed you. You're the one who moved the money. You're the one who came in here with a lawyer pretending he was your little bridge buddy. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late how much she'd revealed. Mr. Harden, still sitting politely in the corner, swirled the last of his wine. Bridge is a fine game, he said lightly. So is chess. Bianca pushed back from the table, her face flushed. This is insane, she snapped, and disappeared upstairs. Darren didn't speak. He stood, slammed the door to his study, and left the hallway in silence. Mr. Harden set his glass down, glanced at me, and gave a slow, knowing nod. I assume you won't need dessert. I walked over, picked up the peach cobbler, and placed it into the fridge. No, I said, but I'll take the leftovers. They thought that dinner was the battlefield, that the forged signature and the $280,000 were the whole story. But what they didn't know was how long I'd seen this coming. Months ago, when I caught Darren snooping through my filing cabinet under the excuse of looking for old tax forms, I didn't scold him. I made a phone call. Mr. Harden helped me change everything. We rewrote my will. Darren's name disappeared from the power of attorney, from the estate instructions, from every page that once assumed love would mean loyalty. I gave the beach house, his favorite post-retirement dream, to my niece, Tilly. She's 27, kind, and sends handwritten thank you notes. We set up protections Darren couldn't override, the real trust account. It's locked behind a system that requires my fingerprint, a code sent to my private number, and Mr. Harden's co-signature. The document Darren tried to sign tonight, a decoy. It leads to a shell account with $175 in it. I moved the real money months ago, quietly, without ceremony. They'll lawyer up, they'll posture. But Mr. Harden already has standing authority to respond to any legal challenge, and he's done this before. I used to think it was cruel to plan for betrayal. Now I think it's just self-respect. I didn't plan tonight for revenge. I didn't come here to catch them in the act. I came because I needed to see it for myself, to know that the small voice in me, the one I'd ignored for too many years, was right. After I cleaned up the dishes and packed the rest of the peach cobbler, I left the gift I'd brought still wrapped on the table, a pair of cufflinks Darren once admired. Not because he deserved them, but because I wanted to be sure I'd walked out with nothing left to give. By the time I backed out of the driveway, the porch lights had gone dark, and I didn't look back. Weeks passed. I didn't check the news, but the phone buzzed anyway. A former colleague forwarded a link, something about a flagged tax return, an open audit tied to Darren's investment firm. I skimmed it once, then deleted the message. Bianca's family, the ones who had always looked at me like I was the wrong kind of old money, quiet, cautious, apparently weren't so quick to offer help when her name ended up next to Darren's in the inquiry. And then came the fallout I expected. One of Darren's business partners, a man named Eric, quietly removed himself from a joint venture. Mr. Harden forwarded me the correspondence. A simple notice. Due to concerns around legal and ethical exposure, I am terminating involvement effective immediately. I imagined Darren reading that, the way his hands would shake, not with guilt, but with disbelief. They'd thought my name was just a formality, something to sign, something to spend. But that name built their illusion of credibility. That signature they copied had opened more doors than they realized. And now, without it, the locks were changing. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Darren. Subject line, "Can we talk?" There was no greeting, no apology, just 5 short words in the body of the email. Let's fix this before lawyers. I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I archived it, like a file you no longer need but aren't quite ready to toss. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, the sun warm through the window. The silence in my home felt earned. They used to think I was the weak one, the one who wouldn't fight back. But they forgot what I came from, what I survived, what I rebuilt with my own hands while they waited for handouts. The cracks in their foundation weren't my doing. I just stopped holding up the roof. I didn't want a plaque, no speeches, no newspaper article. Just a clean room, decent chairs, and women who had been through enough to know the value of quiet power. In a small town outside Boulder, I partnered with a local shelter and used a fraction of the trust, just enough to keep things going for 3 years, no matter what. We called it something simple, the ledger room. Every Tuesday and Thursday, women came in after work or after school pickups. We talked about budgets, about credit, about boundaries. No one asked who funded it. No one needed to. One woman, Alina, stayed behind one evening after the others left. She held up her folder and said, "This is the first time I've looked at my numbers without shame." That was enough. There was something sacred about watching someone reclaim their future without needing anyone's permission. It reminded me of who I used to be, before everything got tangled in guilt and family politics and conditional love. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself. I was simply returning to the version of me that had been buried under sacrifice. At home, I painted the spare room a soft gold and filled it with books. Financial manuals, yes, but also poetry, gardening guides, old novels from my college days. I cooked for myself again, not just to eat, but to enjoy the smell of garlic browning in a pan. I stopped looking at my phone for messages that weren't coming. Mr. Harden called once to say that Darren's inquiry had expanded. Apparently, falsified financial documents had made their way into a failed condo application. The bank was reviewing everything. I thanked him and went back to folding fresh towels. My niece Tilly visited that weekend, staying at the beach house. We sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the waves. "I didn't know people could just start again," she said. I smiled. "They can, quietly." And I realized I didn't need anyone to notice what I was doing. I just needed it to matter. The air in the mountains is different. It doesn't carry the weight of anyone else's expectations. I poured the coffee slowly, letting the steam rise into the October chill. Mr. Harden sat across from me, flipping through some closing documents for the foundation. Tilly leaned back in her chair, cradling her mug like it was the only warmth she needed. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. The view did the work. Gold-tipped trees brushing against a sky so open it made old wounds feel smaller. The cabin had been a quiet purchase. No announcement, just something I wanted, finally, for myself. My phone buzzed on the table. Darren again. I didn't flinch, just turned the screen face down and kept sipping. Mr. Harden caught my eye and nodded once. "Everything's finalized," he said. "No further action needed on your part." I looked out at the edge of the ridge where the sun was pushing against the horizon, like it was tired of waiting. "You know," I said softly, "it's a funny thing about a signature." Tilly looked up. "It only means something," I continued, "when you give it freely, when it's yours to give." She smiled quietly, but with understanding. She'd seen the aftermath, the paper trail, the lies behind the smiles, and now the peace that came from cutting the pen from their hands. Darren used to say I was overprotective, that I micromanaged, that I couldn't let go. But it was never about control. It was about trust. And once trust is gone, a signature becomes just ink. They had tried to turn my name into a key. Instead, it became a lock they couldn't pick. The wind shifted gently. The pines swayed without asking for permission. I leaned back in my chair, the porch creaking beneath me like an old friend. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely wonderfully unreadable. Later that night, I sat at my desk, the lamplight soft on the open ledger from the ledger room. I wasn't checking numbers. I knew them by heart. But reviewing the notes left behind by the women who'd passed through. Paid off my first credit card. Opened a savings account. Stopped apologizing for saying no. Tiny victories, each written in different handwriting, all steady, all real. The walls hummed with quiet resilience. I thought of Darren then, not with anger, not even with pity, but with the calm distance you give to a closed chapter. There was a time when I would have rushed to fix everything, to shield him from the fallout. But love that protects at the expense of truth isn't love, it's avoidance. I had stopped avoiding. The next morning I took a walk through the nearby market. Fresh bread, apples, the faint hum of a street violinist playing something slow and mournful. A child handed me a flyer about a school fundraiser, and I smiled, realizing how long it had been since I'd felt part of ordinary life. I bought flowers on a whim, wild sunflowers, bright and uneven, and placed them on the kitchen counter when I got home. The house smelled like warmth and cinnamon, like something living instead of surviving. When I passed the mirror in the hallway, I caught my reflection and paused, not to check for flaws, but to meet my own eyes. The woman looking back wasn't the mother who had sacrificed everything, nor the widow who had learned to build without applause. She was something in between, steady, awake, untethered. The phone rang once, twice, I let it. When the machine picked up, Darren's voice filled the room, quieter than before. "Mom, it's me. I need to understand how we got here. Please call me." I closed my eyes. For a second, I almost reached for the receiver. Old instincts die hard, but I didn't. I turned off the ringer and walked to the back porch. The horizon blushed pink and orange, the kind of sky that makes you feel like time itself is healing. Mr. Harden had once told me that freedom isn't loud. It's not fireworks or declarations. It's the quiet certainty that you owe no one your peace. That night I understood. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened the folder containing the ledger room's quarterly plans. Beneath it lay another envelope, Darren's first apology letter, never mailed. He'd written it after high school when he'd stolen from my purse to impress a girl. I'd found it years later, hidden in his closet. I used to think it meant he could change. Now I think it just meant he knew how to sound sorry. The candle flickered. I slipped the letter back into the drawer and let the silence settle. Forgiveness wasn't a gift for him anymore. It was one I gave myself. And this time it came without signatures.